You know what time it is. It is time to tackle another one of the 50 nifty United States. So since the first two looked at states that I'm very familiar with, seeing that I live in Pennsylvania and I've traversed Maryland many times, I wanted to tackle one that not only I knew practically nothing about prior to research, but also one that gets kind of overlooked as is. So let's give some love to Arkansas. Arkansas, abbreviated AR, is located in the southeast or west-south central, depending on who you ask. Its capital city is Little Rock. Its nickname is the Natural State. This is their flag. It's got 75 counties and a population of about 3.1 million as of 2025. The only U.S. president from this state would be Bill Clinton, and Arkansas was admitted to the Union in 1836, making it the 25th state. It was also the 9th state to secede from the Union during the Civil War, thus its current constitution dates back to 1874. Looking at the borders, this is actually one of the more complex states as it involves indigenous tribes, European powers, colonialism, and of course, Congress. Indigenous tribes, namely the Osage, existed here for thousands of years, but in terms of the actual state borders we see today, the earliest ones are widely accepted to date back to the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, where the Mississippi River was seen as the divider between European control and the settler colonies. As you may know, this region was part of the greater French Louisiana. However, the first borders of Arkansas as we know them can trace themselves to the Revolutionary War with the Treaty of Friendship in 1795, separating Spanish Louisiana from the U.S., before it would get handed back to the French in 1801. But French control wouldn't last long, as the border with Louisiana can go back to the Louisiana Purchase in 1804, establishing this border at latitude 33 north. Of course, we all know nature doesn't care about our silly man-made lines, and the Mississippi River trolled the colonizers when it changed courses over the years, which caused, problems. So the eastern boundary with Tennessee dates back to what was established in 1836 in the center of the Mississippi River main channel. To the north, Missouri would essentially create a county in 1813 for all the land above Louisiana but below the 36th parallel. There's also a story about this and what's known as the Boot Heel, but we'll save that for the Missouri episode. The boundary with Oklahoma, however, involves some bad things. Shortly after settlers arrived, there had been a push to remove natives. A treaty was eventually signed to establish a boundary with the Osage Nation, and then in 1820 the Choctaw Nation agreed to move to what is now the other side of the Red River in southeastern Oklahoma. No surprise here, but the US then altered the deal again, and in 1828 the border was pushed to 45 miles outside of Fort Smith, and a treaty with the Cherokee Nation established the border we see today. This leaves the border with Texas, and because of them taking forever to survey these lands, this nearly sparked a war with Spain. Thomas Jefferson would be so humiliated by this dispute that he downplayed the Freeman Custis exhibition, which is probably why you've never heard of that, but know all about Lewis and Clark. In 1838, these borders with Texas were secured due to, you guessed it, a treaty. But wait, there's more! You might have heard of this little thing, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 that granted Union admission to pairs of free and slave states coming in unison. Since Michigan was entering as a free state, it was to be paired with Arkansas as a slave state, but the Whig Party didn't want to admit two states that heavily leaned Democrat before the 1836 presidential election, so you can imagine the conundrum this caused. Nonetheless, a writer at the Arkansas Advocate claimed that the right and rank to which we are entitled moved Andrew Jackson's hand to sign the compromise. See, propaganda has always had a clutch on society. All the way up until after the Civil War, the state was basically in the hands of three rich families, a story that all of us here in the States are quite familiar with. Arkansas got its name based off of the native Quapaw word as per early French explorers. And with that, I think we can move on to the physical geography. Because of its size, Arkansas varies greatly in terms of geography. In the north and western parts of the state, it's dominated by the Ozark and Washita Mountains. The Ozarks are a heavily forested highland extending from St. Louis in Missouri all the way to the Arkansas River. The Washita is a bit of an extension of this, extending to Oklahoma, and together they make up the only large area of rugged topography between the Rockies and the Appalachians. This is known as the U.S. Interior Highlands, referring to all of this region. Washita includes the Hot Springs National Park, which Native Americans regularly visited centuries prior to the colonial settlers. In fact, the word is a tribal name, and much of the forests are cloaked in pine and oak trees. The state's highest peak would be Mount Magazine at just over 839 meters, which also hosts a state park, and is the highest point in the U.S. Interior Highlands, found close to Blue Mountain Lake in Logan County. The densely forested region in the south is known as the Arkansas Timberlands, which then leads us to the southern lowlands as well. In terms of the rivers, there is indeed the Washita River that runs through the southwestern part of the state. Of course, we already mentioned the Arkansas River, which basically cuts the state in half, and actually takes origin in Colorado. Red River is down here in the corner, starting from Oklahoma, and of course the Mississippi runs along the western border with all these tributaries. What's interesting is despite the rockier Ozarks and Washita, this half of the state is very flat, making for a vast stretch of agricultural lands. These lowlands would become a hot spot for cotton farming and are part of what's called the Mississippi floodplain. Basically, a floodplain is a flatland area adjacent to a stream full of unconsolidated sedimentary deposits. As far as highways are concerned, most of them are concentrated northeast, where I-55 briefly swoops in to connect with 40, essentially cutting horizontally through the state. 57 and 30 meet at one point here, covering the other diagonal, with the latter essentially coming in through Texarkana. And by now you know what time it is. It is time to talk about the cities. For the first time, we're going to look at a state whose largest city is the capital, that being Little Rock. Little Rock sits right on the Arkansas River, and it got its name from a French explorer in 1722 that noticed two huge rock formations on either side of it, and the smaller of the two had a native settlement around it. Becoming the territorial capital in 1821, it's today known for some of the buildings of that era that still stand, including the Capitol Building, the Old State House, and other preserved buildings known as the Territorial Capitol Restoration. Little Rock also has an abundance of raw materials, including timber, oil, and coal, thus it's a transportation center and has a lot of historic railroads. One of the National Historical Sites would be the Central High School. And what, you might ask, could be so interesting about a high school? Well, let me tell you. In 1957, world attention was given over the fact that 9 black girls tried to enter the Central High School, which was primarily for whites at the time, after desegregation laws. But the governor, Orville Faubus, wasn't a huge fan of this, surprise, and ordered state troops to prevent them from joining. President Eisenhower would send in troops to maintain order and actually forced integration, showing a strain between state and federal power. See, sometimes it isn't always big government that's the problem, it's sometimes littler government. These 9 girls would become known as the Little Rock Nine. MacArthur Park surrounds the Arts Center, as this was the home place of General MacArthur, famous for his role in World War II and the Korean War. And the University of Arkansas is right here in the city. If we jump up north, we'll find the second most populous city, which is still only half the population of Little Rock, called Fayetteville. But because of its location in the mountains, it's no surprise that a lot of the draw here is actually outside of the city, such as the Botanical Gardens of the Ozarks. This features 12 themed gardens as well as the state's only butterfly house and works as one of the most popular outdoor events. Historically speaking, it's also got the Clinton House Museum and, more importantly, the Prairie Grove Battlefield State Park. This would be a Civil War site, and it's allegedly one of the most intact ones in the country. In December of 1862, Union and Confederate forces clashed very hard here, and there are plenty of walking and driving tours to the site. The Hindman Hall Museum is full of artifacts recovered from here, and it's free to access. Moving to another city we already mentioned, Fort Smith is near the border with Oklahoma. If this doesn't seem obvious, this was originally a fort named after General Thomas Smith, built in 1817, but it didn't remain operational for long, as a second nearby one was established to play a role in removing the Cherokee people via the Trail of Tears, commanded by General Zachary Taylor before he was president. It's okay. Later he got punked by a bowl of ice milk and cherries. Today, however, it is one of the state's largest manufacturing hubs, with an emphasis on refrigeration, appliances, heating, and AC units. I guess we call that HVAC. Other bigger cities by the state standards include Springdale, where you can take a rail ride in the restored turn-of-the-century passenger car, and there's also Jonesboro, Conway, and Hot Springs. Yeah, if you haven't gathered this, the cities in Arkansas are a little less extensive than the ones in Pennsylvania and Maryland. Little Rock may not be the same size as Philadelphia, but was Philadelphia mentioned in the Billy Joel hit We Didn't Start the Fire? I think not. Most of the other cities are quite small, but maybe it only takes small cities to produce something large. Kingsland, Arkansas, is the birthplace of the one and only Johnny Cash, even though he mostly grew up in Dyess, which was a community of farmers working government land. Looking more at the Civil War, Pea Ridge National Military Park is famous for saving Missouri for the Union, which was seen as a massive turning point for the war in March of 1862. Many of the Confederate soldiers came from small towns that were not used to traveling far distances, and the long and bloody battle was fought between 23,000 people, leaving much of the area in ruins. Hot Springs National Park is said to be one of the best reasons to visit Arkansas, and it's known for hot springs. Others include Park and Archaeological State Park, the Louisiana Purchase State Park, and many others. There's something known as Crowley's Ridge, which is a rolling hill amongst the flat areas by the Mississippi, formed due to eroded land and wind adding height to the ridge, and it's believed that at one point it was an island between the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. The natural steps just outside of the capital sit by Lake Maumelle, but this one I'm only bringing up for the lore. A legend circulated of Confederate gold lying below the steps, and in the 1940s, residents began blowing them up with explosives to try and find this. Yeah, they didn't find anything. However, there's also a spooky legend around a woman in white that can allegedly be seen walking in the cemetery in late October, where the old Baptist church sat before it caught fire. In October of 1880, this woman lost her husband days after their wedding, and she shortly disappeared. It's believed that she committed suicide, and to this day she's been seen wandering from the cemetery to the Arkansas River. But returning to more anomalies, there's the Blanchard Spring Caverns, which is full of stalactites, and it's developed with rooms that one can explore. War Eagle Cavern may suit those who like their moonshine, as it has a moonshine shack and a maze. Boy, what a combination that must be. The Cosmic Cavern has 2 bottomless lakes and a soda straw formation, which is said to be haunted, and the Mammoth Spring is the 7th largest karst spring in the world, which is basically when groundwater flows from underground conduits. The tallest waterfall would be Hemden Hollow Falls as part of a trail, and they drop around 210 feet into the sandstone Ozarks. And it's actually the tallest fall between the Rockies and the Appalachians. Animals found in Arkansas include some of the basic ones like the white-tailed deer and the eastern chipmunk. However, you may also stumble upon the Indiana bat, the southern leopard frog, and the ivory-billed woodpecker. On the invasive side, however, it may not be uncommon to see a wild boar, a true nightmare for the agricultural sectors. Being a southern state, Arkansas usually has fairly mild winters with the occasional super cold period, and their summers are hot and humid. But this depends on where you are, as the Ouachita Mountains and the Gulf of Mexico have the biggest influence over the climate. Other attractions that might make one visit include the Magic Springs Water Park in Hot Springs, the Buffalo Natural River for kayaking and boating, and a plethora of museums from art to the Bill Clinton Library to the Crystal Bridges Museum and even a Walmart museum. Think I could walk around there in sweatpants with a beer in my hand? Speaking of which, brands that you might recognize from the state include Walmart, as per the museum, J.B. Hunt, and Tyson Foods. And no surprise here, but Arkansas's most famous beer is from an Ozark brewery, that being the BDCS Ozark beer. Looking at some foods, they're a state very much known for their sweets, and the most popular dishes include the Arkansas possum pie, and no, it is not made out of possums. Rather, it's a chocolate and cream cheese layered cake and pecan crust. Another one is biscuits with chocolate gravy, Southern Hush Puppy, which is a sweetened cornmeal with flavors of onion, and they really love their catfish, spinach, coleslaw, and pork. Because of its location and history, you'll find a blend of European, Native American, and African culture. You'll generally find some pretty warm hospitality from the locals, and it is indeed one of the more religious states heavily around Christianity. Unfortunately, its entire history since statehood has been a bit of a stereotype, being somewhat backwater and racist, though keep in mind that is very much a generalization. On that note, however, it is one of the poorest states in terms of GDP and poverty. Agriculture is less prominent than it once was, but it's still a driving force, namely with rice cultivation and livestock. All of this is helped by how much the state is irrigated, and Arkansas is also home to the only diamond mine in the US. Historically, Arkansas has been heavily influenced by the Democratic Party, however in recent decades it's been seeing a lot of Republican action. At one point you maybe could have called it a swing state, but these days it's firmly red. No, not that red, the other red. And with this, I do think we're going to conclude the episode. Arkansas may be a state that seems to get little attention, is very sparsely populated, and has a bit of a stereotype, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its charm, and there's all sorts of cool historical and geographical lore to be learned. Like I said, this video required a lot more research on my end, as I've never been there, and I've really not read up on it much. So thank you for sticking with me to the end. And if you'd like, let me know which state you'd like me to cover in this series next in the comments. Talk to you later.